Welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name, of course, is Seesaw or Chris, and today we're talking about Guild Wars 2 and World of Warcraft in 2020. So today we're going to actually take a look at both of these MMOs and sort of compare them. And it's kind of strange for me because these seem like two of the most opposite MMOs in terms of the big MMOs, but I get a lot of people in my comments asking about which of these two games they should play. So I was like, hey, let's make a video about it. We'll talk about it. I'm going to cover some very broad topics, and I'm definitely going to leave some stuff out. So if there's anything you think that should be mentioned about either of these games, do so in the comments below. And as always, please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. But yeah, so let's get into it. The topics that we're going to be looking at today are pretty basic, like I said. So we're going to look at the new player experience. We're going to look at the leveling process. We're going to look at the endgame content. We're going to look at gear and progression, and then finally we're going to look at graphics, and we're going to kind of do an overall summary of this at the end and kind of give you which game I think would be best to go forward. Both games do cater to very different players though, so it's going to come a lot down to what your playstyle is and how you would actually like to enjoy an MMO. But let's get into it. Alright, so our first topic is the new player experience, and if you're someone who has not played either of these MMOs, this is probably gonna be a pretty big factor for you. And it's definitely the make it or break it for MMOs. There's definitely a lot of really good MMOs out there that have terrible new player experiences, and a lot of MMOs, conversely, that have great new player experiences, but then don't deliver later on. So it's a very tricky matter, but it sets the tone for the rest of the game. We'll start with Guild Wars 2 because I believe Guild Wars 2 takes the edge in this category. Number one, the entire base game is free. So that is a tremendous amount of content that you get to play. You fully get to experience what Guild Wars 2 is without having to put any money down, which is huge. It's just a ton of content that you can play. Now, there's definitely limitations to not having a free account, don't get me wrong, but in terms of exploring and feeling out what classes feel like, what skills feel like, what combat feels like, what the graphics look like, you get so much from that free base game that it's great. It's also great if you and a bunch of friends are trying to get into a game. Well, at least then you can all get into it pretty easily and explore. World of Warcraft is a little bit less fun, less easy. They do have a free version up to level 20 for retail. It's pretty good. Level 20 isn't huge in World of Warcraft. There's not. You get access to some basic stuff, like some dungeons, you get some PvP, but it's very limited in terms of how much you experience. A lot of the classes don't really feel like themselves at level 20. There's certainly a lot of skills that you're not going to experience, a lot of playstyles you're not going to experience, and certainly a lot of game modes that you're not going to experience without the full game. Now, there's definitely some game modes you won't experience in Guild Wars 2 as well without the expansions, but that said, when you do come to the actual purchase decision, it's a lot more intimidating to get into World of Warcraft because you're talking about the actual purchase of the game plus a subscription, which can add up. Whereas with Guild Wars 2, you do have the purchase for the expansions, but they do tend to go on sale quite regularly, and once you've made that purchase, it is pretty smooth sailing without a subscription model. So I'd say Guild Wars 2 has a bit of the upper hand here, but that's just my opinion. The next topic is the leveling process. I feel like I've kind of just structured this in the ways that you'll be impacted by things when you get into the game, though I guess technically graphics could come quite soon. But anyways, leveling is a very big part of MMOs. It's one of the core facets of the game, and it's weirdly, and I don't know why I feel this way, but it's probably the piece that these games have the most similarities with. And it sounds kind of crazy to say that, but just looking at some of the other categories, this is the one where I'm going to draw some similarities. And what's really happened over the years is I'd say that World of Warcraft's leveling and open world exploration has become more and more like Guild Wars 2, which in a lot of ways would be the more modern MMO style. When Guild Wars 2 launched, it revolutionized a lot of the ways that leveling and open world interaction with other players work. For instance, there wasn't kill stealing, everyone was sort of, encouraged to work together. There was a lot of these world events that would be group focused and would reward you in different ways and would be changing in like kind of dynamic events. So there's a lot that way that I'd say World of Warcraft has started implementing into their game. It's definitely more relevant when you get to later zones and later expansions. A lot of the later expansions, you'll do a lot of world quests to get XP and stuff like that. Whereas the first zones that you'll do are very traditional to World of Warcraft and much more structured. Whereas Guild Wars 2's quests aren't very structured, and a lot of people actually have issues with that. There are flaws in Guild Wars 2's system. The heart quests have been something that have been taken away and added and played with, and they're still not in a perfect situation, and some people love them, some people hate them. And I think one of the biggest reasons people dislike leveling in Guild Wars 2 is that there isn't necessarily a structure for how you go through the zones. It's open to interpretation, to exploration. Now, there is a personal story that will guide you on your way, and it does, give a story to your character, but it doesn't necessarily lead you through the zone. Whereas World of Warcraft, there are specific storylines that you can follow. There are obviously side quests, but for instance, whenever you start a new expansion piece of content, you will have a quest that will lead you there, that'll lead to more quests, and it's very obvious how you continue through it. Both games do allow for both PvP and PvE leveling, where you can level up as a group with friends in instance content, and it works quite well. So I'd say they're fairly on par with that. World of Warcraft probably has a larger selection of content that comes from its multiple expansions and many years, whereas Guild Wars 2 does have a fair bit of content, but maybe a bit more narrow of a scope in terms of how much content there is to do. This leads us really nicely into a discussion about the types of content that each game has. I think this section really lends itself better to World of Warcraft. I mentioned earlier the game has just had so many years out to create content, so many expansions, that there's just so much to do, and it's really narrowed down into types of content that they do very well, whereas Guild Wars 2 still kind of has an issue of really trying to figure out what content they like making, what content works for their players. It is kind of a positive because they do like to shake it up, but I feel like there's been a miss where they could have just really doubled down on a type of content and had a lot more depth and more content to actually go through instead of just widening the amount of content, types of content each time. So let's get a little bit into it and break it down. So World of Warcraft, you have your instanced dungeons, instanced raids, and they have the Mythic Plus system, which has been a really big success. It's very enjoyable for people who like the typical dungeon and really want to challenge themselves, where it allows people who are a bit more casual to enjoy that, but people who want to optimize and really push for best times to enjoy that side of the game as well. It always, as anything in any MMO, the more meta you get, the less class variety there is. So there are some issues where you'll see the same type of classes stacked multiple times for these really high intense groups, which, it's an issue in any game you play when you try to play it at the most competitive level. We do have raids. WoW's, in my opinion, one of the kings of raids. They know what they're doing. They know how to make raids fun. Even in Battle for Azeroth, there's been a lot of issues. Some of the story wasn't great, but still, if you were there just for raids, it's been pretty okay. That's as good as I can say about it, but the raids are always pulled off quite well. For PvP, we have Battlegrounds, a lot of different types with varying sizes of teams. We have arenas, which are also quite good, and we have now some sort of open world PvP system, which has, it's been okay. There's been some, I mean, mostly you run into zergs or you get killed while you're taking a flight path somewhere. It's okay. There's been better examples of open world PvP in my humble opinion, such as Wintergrasp and stuff like that. But you know, that's a discussion for a whole nother video. Guild Wars 2, however, has a lot of different pieces of content as well. They have dungeons, they have fractals, which are kind of like Mythic Plus, except for some reason they stop at level 100 and won't go above it. That's also a video that I've discussed many times. We have raids as well, which have, in my opinion, been done very well. However, there is very few of them and they get added to the game very rarely. There are also now strike missions, which are kind of their bridge between fractals and raids, although certain fractals are much more difficult than strike missions and sometimes even more difficult than raids. So it's a little bit of a muddy staircase, but that's kind of the stepping stone that they're trying to work with. Raids and strike missions do have a lot of potential. Strike missions are essentially just kind of a one boss in a box situation, whereas raids typically have a little bit more of a zone and story and different pieces of content between the bosses. So that kind of gives you a feel for it. Obviously, we also have PvP content. We have structured PvP, where it's more of a 5v5 conquest situation. However, we have added 2v2 arena-style combat as well as open world. We have world v world PvP, which I would say takes the cake in terms of the open world feel. That is, of course, unless you're going to play classic WoW and truly play on a PvP server and get that open world experience as well. So, you know, it's all about how you want to play, but there is a ton of options for content in both games. I don't think anyone can say that there isn't, you know, a lot of options for either game. It just depends on what you enjoy playing. And hey, look at that. This leads us very nicely into a conversation about character progression and gearing. This is probably where the two games differ the most. This is when someone asks me about both these games and I'm like, you're only gonna like one of them. Like, it's very rare that an MMO player identifies with both types of character progression. It is out there, and I sometimes enjoy both games, but there's a reason why I can't devote all of my time to a game like Guild Wars 2, and there's a reason why I keep getting drawn back to games like World of Warcraft, and that is the gearing and progression systems. So we'll start with World of Warcraft because I think it's the more classic MMO approach. It did in a lot of ways set the standard, not saying at all that it was the first game or MMO to do this, but it has the gear treadmill. Very typical system of where you will acquire a piece of gear, and as the game progresses and new raids come out, there will be new pieces of gear with a higher item level that will be better than the gear you have. And this is just an ongoing cycle. You know that if you take a break from the game for like a year or an expansion, your gear is going to be out of date. You're going to want to grind for more gear. There's always more gear to get, and there's always things to, you know, be excited for. Now, the very big issue that has definitely become more of a thing as the expansions go on, and specifically one of the things that have not felt good in Battle for Azeroth, is the RNG and the amount of weird, you know, different stat and chaotic things that you have to try and find in sims and stuff like that. It's a very confusing system now. They keep saying they want it to be simple. They want you just to be able to look at the item level and understand what's better. But the more they try and change it to be like that, the more complex it gets. It's a very gross system compared to what it used to be, but there is that constant push for new gear. The flip side of this would be Guild Wars 2, where we have what you would call a horizontal character progression system, where there is a very slight gear treadmill, But once you have reached the peak of that, you really don't have to worry about gear, and it's more about progressing your character in different ways. The game has masteries, is what they use to do this, and there's different, masteries such as gliding or different skills on different mounts and stuff like that you can make your character feel more powerful without actually becoming more powerful. Now, like I said, there is a slight gear treadmill where you will go from exotic to ascended to possibly legendary gear, but even that step from ascended to legendary gear, that's a cosmetic and convenient step, so it is really a pretty quick step to have top gear, which is nice in a lot of ways because you can get to max level and get into endgame content with your friends really quickly. It's also nice because you can kind of jump back into Guild Wars 2 and not really have to worry too much about your gear. Yes, you might have to optimize for your build if there's a different stat type that you have to look for or something like that, but in terms of the actual quality of the gear, you always come in knowing that you're ready to go, which is a nice feeling. Out of the two of them, I myself prefer gear treadmill and always having something to work for. It's just who I am. I always like to have that next piece of gear. I'm not at all saying that World of Warcraft's current system is enjoyable, but I'm saying that I played Guild Wars 2 quite solidly for 2 years and eventually got kind of bored of the gearing progress. So I'd say if there was a piece of the two games that was gonna sort of shape your opinion about them and really push you towards one of them, this section's probably going to do it. All right, the last piece of the puzzle for me is the graphics. I think graphics make a big difference to people. I know when we talk about games, it's always gameplay over graphics, but at the end of the day, it is what you're looking at the entire time, and it does make an impact on how you're going to enjoy it. Specifically, if there's an art style that speaks more to you. I think this is another, very opinion-based section where you might just find one of the games speaks more to you than the other. Personally, I find Guild Wars 2 graphics to look a bit nicer than World of Warcraft. A lot of that has to come with the age of both games. That being said, I think that as time continues, WoW's graphics will always kind of look this quality, where Guild Wars 2 might start to look even more dated as things go on. The other step to this is that Guild Wars 2 has a lot of optimization issues. Even with a really nice computer, there's only so much you can get from your frame rate, and at a certain point it's just kind of gonna cap out, and it sucks knowing that the game could run so much smoother like a lot of other MMOs do. There's just a lot of limitations with what their engine's able to do. So it's a bit of a sticky situation, but you can look at both graphics. This is the one piece you can kind of look at videos and stuff like that, and certainly the free trials of both games will give you a good feel for what the rest of the game will look like. So it's a very easy thing to contrast, but it's something that you kind of have to take some time and really just appreciate both of them and see which one lends itself more to you in the end. All right, there you have it. Those are all the sections. I believe that's a pretty good summary of both games and what the differences are between them. I think, like I said, these two games are they're created for two very different players. I would notably say that the more casual open world focused player is more of a Guild Wars 2 player, and the more hardcore gear progression player is a WoW player. That being said, the line between the two games is continuously getting more blurred, so I do understand people's, just interest in rediscovering what each game's about every so often. I think it's always good to kind of refresh yourself and sort of see where you are as a gamer, but hopefully this has helped you. If it has, what game do you think you're going to play next? I'd love to hear it in the comments below, or is it neither of these MMOs? And if not, which MMO are you interested in currently? But yeah, thank you for watching, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Once again, if you would like, if you'd subscribe, if you'd comment, I'd love all that. It's always super nice as a content creator to see that interaction with your video. It makes me all warm and fuzzy, so there you go. But yeah, until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.